I want to do a video on the installation of this two-post lift that I purchased. It's the model L1000, and it's like all these lifts, it's manufactured over in China. And there's the company's got a couple videos out, or one video I should say. There's no narration in it, there's just a little bit of music. It's not bad, but you know what? There's a lot of detail that they leave out. And there's a lot of detail on there's a couple other videos too that guys have done that they've left out detail. And so I thought I'd do this one, because if you're kind of a dummy like I am, and you appreciate really detailed instructions or a checklist, you're not going to get it with this. The instructions that come with it are really, really poor. The translation is bad. It's black and white. You know, they're not color photographs in the thing. They're grainy. It's like low resolution. And they leave a lot of stuff out. It's terrible. So I'm going to start off first and tell you a couple things even before you start putting this thing together. So when I ordered this thing, it was delivered here to my house. I'm on an acre. It's pretty wide open. There was plenty of room for the semi to turn around. And I have a forklift attachment for my tractor, and they told me what the weight of this thing would be, which the freight company, FedEx, said it was 1,110 pounds. And my tractor will lift 1,150, so I'm thinking, okay, it's kind of right at the limit. But so they came out and opened the back of the FedEx semi, and I could not lift this thing, not even close. Luckily, the guy had a hand truck, and we were able to use a hand truck, get it on the lift gate, get it down. He was able to go towards the back of my property, turn around and leave. And then I broke it down. It comes on a metal pallet. You'll see on some of the other videos. And then once I broke it down off of the metal pallet, then I could pick each one of these towers up easily with my tractor. But I come to find out, when I went back and looked, the manufacturer says the weight of this it's almost 1,400 pounds. So I'm not sure why FedEx said it was 1,110, because yeah, it's like 1,400 pounds. So when it comes with all this stuff kind of stuffed into these pillars. These, of course, are your arms, and you've got your hydraulic tank and whatnot, and they're all stuffed inside these things. So of course you pull those out. Now, I'm not going to get into the layout. The instructions aren't bad on the layout. It's pretty simple. For me, it was easy because I'm installing it here in a bay, right, that was pretty narrow. So I just took the dimensions of this bay. I took the dimensions of what they said this was, which, by the way, everything's in millimeters and centimeters, and you have to convert it to inches if you want to use SAE measurements. And then I just, I subtracted that, divided it by 2, and then I was able to figure out how far off of each wall these columns should be. And then once I got the first one set, then I just put this metal plate. I'm going to get more into that in a minute. As far as lifting these things up, they are pretty heavy. My wife and I were able to lift it, and she's pretty skinny. So, yeah, and I'm an average sized dude, so it can be done. I had to kind of put my shoulder into it. It wasn't hard though, but it definitely, you knew you had some weight, and it took a little bit to get them stood up, but we were able to get it done. So now I'm going to fast forward, talk about the layout again. So again, the layout, I just measured off the wall. I used a square to square it off the wall, which was easy for me. You probably won't be able to do that if you're in more of an open area, but it was easy for me. I was able just to square this post, the first one off the wall. Then they give you this metal plate. Now, of course, they make a couple different types of these lifts. Some are more of a gantry style, or I shouldn't even say gantry, but they have all the hydraulics and the cables run across the top, and the floor is smooth. And they're better for where you have a lot of headroom. I didn't have that, so I went with this one on the bottom. It's not as desirable because obviously if you're dumping a transmission or whatever, you know, you're going to have to roll it up over this hump. Not a big deal, but so anyway, once I got the first post squared up and I got a couple of bolts in it, which I'm going to get into again, then I laid this metal plate down. It's got a little groove and indentation, and you'll see that. You can't miss it. And I set that in there, and then from there I pushed this other pillar to where that was tight, and I squared it up off this wall, and boom, I was done. So now let me tell you something about these carriages. So these carriages are the whole assembly here that's yellow. And in the video that you see the company puts out, some dude just grabs this thing and lifts it up, because that's one of the steps, is you have to lift this thing up like 18 inches. And mine would not budge. And I'm thinking, what the hell? I could not budge mine. Now, what I was trying to lift them up before it was bolted to the floor. So that was part of it. I would lift up, and I was lifting the base off the floor. So, but I wanted to get my alignment and everything. I didn't want to bolt them in until I had everything dialed in and lined up. So I put a pry bar down underneath here and just pried. And then, with the pry bar, it was easy. They went up easy. I stuck a couple blocks of wood in there. You can see that. And I had some metal brackets from who knows what. I stuck those in to hold these pins up, just to make it a little easier, so these pins aren't down on top of this blue, I don't know what to call this thing. We'll just call it the blue hump, right? So that's what I did. I just did a pry bar, pried them up a little bit. Now that they're bolted down, I haven't tried to lift them, but I'm sure they'll lift up easy. So that's the stage I'm at now. I've stood both the posts up. I've squared it up. I've lifted up these carriages, probably about about a 2x4, you can see, so 3.5 inches. And I've got the plate down. I've got a couple bolts in the floor. Okay, so now let's talk about these bolts in the floor. Here's the problem with these bolts in the floor. What they give you are these. And I don't have any problem with these. You see some guys online, oh, they're Chinese fasteners, and I think these would have been fine. But here's the problem with these. They're 18 millimeter. So you have to use an 18 millimeter, because the size is the same, by the way. If it's an 18 millimeter fastener or anchor, wedge anchor in the ground, you use an 18 millimeter bit. The problem is, I'm in Arizona, and I couldn't find an 18 millimeter bit anywhere. Lowe's, Home Depot, Ace Hardware. I could order one off Amazon, but the weird thing is too, even with Amazon, I couldn't get next day delivery. I was like, they couldn't get it to me for 5 days. I found a couple other places online, same thing. It was, like 10 days to get one of these 18 millimeter bits. And I would have waited because I'm not in a big rush, but the problem is I was worried if I hit a piece of rebar or something drilling through and I ruined the tip of the bit. Now what? Now I got to go back and order another one and wait another 2 weeks or 10 days to get it, or even 5 days. That just wasn't doable for me. I wanted to be able to control my ability to get new bits, run down to Home Depot and get a new bit or whatever. So I didn't use these. I went and got some, made in the USA, redheads, I think they're called. And they're slightly bigger than the 18 millimeter. They're 3/4 of an inch. So they should even have a little bit more holding power. So that, that's what I did. Obviously, it increased the cost because the bits aren't cheap. They're like 25 bucks a piece. And I think I'm going to use about 3 of them, primarily because I'm not a very patient person. I want to get this done. I want to get these holes drilled. I've already drilled 3 holes, and that bit's kind of slowing down. You could tell it's getting worn down. So my house is 19 years old, so the concrete's pretty hard. So I went and got these, I think they're 6 1/4 inch, which is the same length as the 18 millimeter redheads. They're 3/4 inch, And so that's the point I'm at now. I've got two of the anchors and bolts in on this side, and my concrete was plenty thick, no issues there. I've got one here, I'm getting ready to drill the other one. And so I'll pick up the video again once I get all these holes drilled and I get this thing anchored down. Then I'll continue on and we'll go into the leveling process. So I want to make one correction so nobody else makes the same mistake that I did. I have one of these cheap ass, it's like 7 amps. It's a hammer drill, but it's not very powerful. So I drilled 3 of these holes with this thing, and I finally gave up, and I went down to Home Depot and I rented a Makita that's probably, no joke, probably 5 times this size, and it went through this concrete like butter. I mean, it took me less than 5 minutes to drill the remaining 7 holes, and each one of these took me about 30 minutes because this one would overheat, the drill would overheat. Plus, it comes with a bit. It comes with a bit when you rent it. It's $40 for 4 hours. And one of these bits is like $27, $28, and I had to buy 2 of them because I hit rebar in one of my holes. So anyway, the moral of the story is don't be a dummy like me. Even if you have one of these smaller hammer drills, don't waste your time. Go get the big Makita, rent it at Home Depot, 4 hours, $40, comes with a bit. You're gonna be money ahead and you're gonna save yourself a whole lot of headache. Okay, so I have all my 3/4 inch wedge fasteners down in the hole. They're tightened, they're probably like 40, 50 foot-pounds, but they're not tightened up to specs, but they're good enough for now. The next thing I'm gonna work on, a little out of order from what the instructions, but I wanna get the drilling and all this stuff done so I can put those tools away. But what they give you for this plate, to secure this plate, now this plate, of course, has really one purpose. It's to protect these cables, and it's to protect the hydraulic line that's going to run between the pillars. So it's not like it's, it's weight bearing. You're fastening this to the concrete just to hold it in place. And the kind of fasteners that they gave us, or gave me rather, is just a smaller version of the other ones. And these are 10 millimeter. You run into the same problem. You have to find a 10 millimeter drill, but that's a no-brainer. I was gonna just get 3/8. It's really close in dimensions. But then I decided not to go with this at all because I don't want that sticking up out of that blue cover. Running tires over that, it's probably not a big deal, but I just didn't like it. So what I did is I got some drop-in anchors that are threaded, 3/8. You can see they're threaded. It takes a tool here. They go in really easy. You just drill the hole, you drop them in. I won't go through this in detail, but you can watch a video on it. There's tons of them, but it has this pin, this little tool. This tool's like, I don't know, $3. These are cheap. You bang it a couple times with this tool, and it spreads it out, and then you can just thread down in there. And so what I'm going to thread is just probably a stainless steel, like a 303 stainless, with a flat head on it, and maybe a big Phillips. So now I've got the hydraulic hose in. This thing comes with 2 hoses, a short one, a long one. Obviously the long one is the one that goes in between the 2 pillars. Very simple. You want the relief down so that, obviously, so it's resting on the floor as much as possible. When you line it up and align it, get ready to tighten that compression nut. It's a flare nut type deal. So, and it's 19 millimeter wrench, and just snug it up and maybe a tiny bit more, just kind of with your hand and a little bit of your wrist. Don't put your elbow into it. Don't put your shoulder into it. If you do that, you're probably going to over tighten it, and that causes as many leaks as these hydraulic hoses being too loose, so keep that in mind. Then you can see where I did the drop down anchors. There's one in there. It's a little deeper than the one on this side. This one is just barely down, almost flush really. And then I have a 3/8 Phillips large head that I'll put on there with a fender washer on the top. It's going to be so much better than a stud sticking through with a nut on it. I didn't like that. That's not good. So I'll show you that tomorrow, because for a little added pizzazz, I'm actually painting the fender washers yellow just to kind of keep with the blue and yellow theme. And I'll put that all back together tomorrow and then continue on. So what I did here with these fasteners, where I had the drop in, you can see the hole right there for the drop in bolt. I just took some vinyl tubing that had a 3/8 inch inside diameter, and I ran it over that machine screw. I left just enough for the width of the of this plate, so that you could still, use your fingers to get it started down inside that threaded insert. So, and then it's going to protect it. Of course, the reason I did this is to protect it from these cables that are going to be moving across the floor. Now, the floor is epoxy, so I'm not, and even if it was just bare concrete, I don't think that would matter. But of course, this hydraulic hose may move a little as it pressurizes and depressurizes. It may jerk a little bit, and you've got these cables. I just didn't want those hitting up against this threaded shaft. I'm sure it's overkill, but that's what I did. Okay, so our plate's back on, looks good, no issues. The next step is we're going to have to level both of these columns on both sides. So we got a 4-foot level. It's technically easy, physically a pain in the ass, because I'm going to have to take these shims and yeah, it's not complicated, but I'm going to have to loosen all my bolts up, check the level, put shims in, torque it down, check it, loosen it again, add, remove shims, torque it down. It's a process. So you just go in a star pattern, just like you do when you put a tire on a car. That's all I'll say about that. So my bolts have all been torqued down. The next step is to take this cable. It's got this threaded rod attached to the end of it, and it's pretty simple. You're going to have one coming from the opposite post. It's going to come through the bottom, and then you just take and you put it back up in that hole. They go straight up, and you're going to want it to come through that hole right there. That's right in the middle of the screen. It looks harder than it is. The reality of it is it's really easy, but just be aware, like this is on the first notch here where it catches the ladder going up, and it's up too high. So if I took this one and I went up back through and brought it up through here, it wouldn't reach. This carriage has to be lower for it to reach and for you to be able to get the washer and those two nuts on. So I've already done this one on this side, and you can see I had to bring it down a little bit. I don't know what that is, probably about a foot, right? So I had to bring it down, and like I said before, my carriages are really hard to lift. In fact, I had to put a floor jack under it. They lift really easy with a floor jack, but I guess I'm a wimp. I don't know. They're really difficult to lift. So I just used a floor jack and lifted it just a hair, enough where I could pull that release ring. If you don't know what the release ring is, it's these little black rings. So you got to get it up just a hair so you can pull that ring and disengage the thing that holds it into the ladder, the cam that holds it into the ladder, and then you can lower it down. And if you lower it down, like I said, about 12 inches, put it on a 2x4, 4x4, whatever, then this cable will be long enough, or this will be low enough for that cable to reach and come up through. So I did this one on this side. Sorry about the screen moving around. I did this one on this side. Now, I will tell you on their company video, they don't show using these washers, but yet they included these washers. These came from the factory on the end of these threaded rods, so I'm using them. It just doesn't make sense not to. They came with 4 of them, so I stacked 2 here, and I'm gonna stack 2 on the other side. That's just how I'm gonna do it. You probably don't need the washers, but why not? But just keep in mind, you gotta have one of these higher than the other. One's a little high. They're the same height now, but when you're doing those cables, you're gonna have one of them a little high, one of them a little low, depending on which cable you're doing. I mean, you'll figure it out. You'll just look at it and you'll know. To get the angle of the dangle, yeah, you gotta have one up a little bit, one down a little bit, and then you'll have enough slack to where you can get that threaded portion up into that hole and get your nuts on. Then you're just gonna reverse it on the other side. You'll go down with the one that was up, and you'll go up with the one that was down a little bit, not much, just enough, and you'll get it through the other one. Once you get the nuts on, you're home free, and you're ready to go to the next step, which is to tension these. And that's just done really simply with a pry tool like this. So what you want to do on this tensioning part is you've got your 2 nuts there, right? So just get them relatively close together, right, like that. Put your pry bar in there, pry up, then run that bottom nut down to the washers, and then you can follow the top nut and lock them together. By the way, the reason that you're doing this is after you put your arms on here, if these cables aren't at the same tension, one side's going to go up a little higher than the other side. And so this is how you're going to tweak it, and you're going to get them exactly the same, coming up exactly the same. You're going to do it by tensioning these cables. You can see they go up through a pulley. It's easy, piece of cake. So yeah, when you think you got them about right, grab yourself a spotlight and some way to measure, a tape measure or a ruler like this. And those nuts are 26 millimeters. So I didn't have 2 26 millimeter wrenches. I only had one, so I had to use a big crescent wrench. That worked fine. But if you have 2 26 millimeter, it'll be even easier for you. So when I did mine, I had about 7.5 centimeters of exposed shaft coming up through. That's from the washer to the tip of the shaft, 7.5 centimeters. I just put my crescent wrench on the bottom nut, my 26 millimeter on the top nut, and I tightened them against each other. So our next step is putting on the arms. This is pretty easy. Just so you know, they all have, there's 4 of them, A, B, C, and D. One of mine was missing a sticker, but by process of elimination, obviously I could figure out which one it was. Then if you go down here on the carriage, you can see that they all have a sticker also, A, B, C, and D. So it's real easy to tell where these arms go. Now I will tell you, the way you put these in is you're going to pull this pin. You pull this pin up here out, and it's going to go through the arm. You'll see, it's very easy. The problem though is there's a snap ring underneath here. And I don't know if you've ever dealt with snap rings. I suspect if you're putting a lift in, you have. You've done, you understand them, you've worked with them a lot, and you probably have snap ring pliers. If you don't have snap ring pliers, it's a pain in the ass. I mean, when I was a young kid and I was poor, working on stuff, we had all kinds of ways. You know, we'd use two little claw tools and, you know, pull apart, hope it didn't fly in your face and take your eye out. But if you don't have these pliers, you're going to find it more difficult. Another way to do it, I saw an old timer do this years ago. If you don't have snap ring pliers, the way this guy did it, he was doing an annual on an airplane and he couldn't find his snap ring pliers. He loaned them out or something. He was cussing up a storm. But anyway, he took safety wire and went through each one of the holes. And then he put a pair of gloves on and just kind of like floss, he grabbed each end of the safety wire, wrapped it around his hand and just pulled them apart. And he left the safety wire on each one until he was ready to put them back on. It was a kind of a pain in the ass, but you know, it worked actually really well in a pinch for him. And I never have done it myself, but it's always been in the back of my mind. I was helping him do the annual on this airplane. So anyway, yeah, so get yourself some pliers. Like I said, I suspect most guys that are putting the lift in, or gals that are putting the lift in, you have a pair of these already. So just be aware that those are on the bottom. So I'm getting ready to put the first one on. Before you attempt to put these legs on, take this gear cam and turn it away from your post. And then, of course, you're gonna pull your pin out and your arm will go on and your pin will go down through easy. And then you take and turn this gear cam back towards the gear. If this is turned towards the pin, you're gonna need a third hand. You'll need someone to help you to pull this pin up, grab this thing and pull it up. But if it's turned away, you can do it yourself. You won't need someone to help you. Just be advised. So that step is done. That took maybe about 10 minutes, a little less than 10 minutes, very easy. One person can do it easily in less than 10 minutes. Your lift is gonna come with these 4 pad extensions, and they have this recessed areas for them on each post. I put 2 there and 2 there. So all the not even, I'm going to say hard, I'll say most of the grunt work is done. Now the fun part begins, which is the installation of the hydraulic pump and the electrical. So it's all plumbing and electric from here. Fun stuff. So we'll start on that now. So this is your pump assembly, combination motor and hydraulic pump, 220 volts. And so that's what we're gonna work on next. This thing does have some mass to it. It's pretty heavy. My wife just brought me out a peppermint mocha and Madeline's from Starbucks. So yeah, so that's what we're gonna do next is this. Now the unit's gonna come with these 4 machine screws. And I'm gonna turn it around and show you where they go, because the plate on the back is universal. So here's the back. It's a universal plate, and you'll see that it's got a slot here and a slot here. So these long slots on the very bottom and the next long slot set up is what you're gonna use. You're not gonna use the top slots. It's right there in the middle of the screen. And you're not gonna use any of the holes. Okay, so take your 4 screws and put them in there. So there you have your 4 machine screws on the back of this plate. And we're just gonna walk it over there and just hang it off of that hanger right there. So that's all done. That was more difficult than I thought. By the way, those are 14 millimeter, the nuts and the heads on the machine screws. Having all 4 of those in the slot and trying to do it by yourself, it's hard to get them, all 4 of them lined up. You'll get 3 of them lined up, but one of them's cockeyed, then you kind of readjust it. You'll get 3 other ones, and one of the ones you just had in there, it's out now. If you got someone to help you, it would be easy. Yeah, it's be a piece of cake. But if you're by yourself, or if you're kind of a weirdo like me and you like the bragging rights of saying, hey, I did all this by myself, nobody was helping me, I would recommend you only put the top ones in. Don't put the bottom ones in. Just put the top in, hang it from the top, and then once it's hung, then put the bottom ones in. Trust me, you'll be much happier. Okay, so the next thing I already did, but it's a no-brainer because we've already done it once, and that was I put this hydraulic hose on. It goes from the tank down to the base of this pillar, and it's just like what we did under here. It's 19 millimeter on the couplings there. The one thing I will tell you, do the bottom one first. You're going to find it much easier because it's more difficult to get lined up. You're down there on your knees and whatnot. And then this one's easier to kind of maneuver. I found something here I don't really like, not a big deal. But on this hydraulic hose, the way it was made, if you lay it flat, the 90s go in opposite directions, which I don't know why they did that. Because it comes off and goes down and they should have booked the 90s on this hydraulic hose. I can show you on my tractor, but I think you guys know what I mean. The 90s should have been the same, coming off the same way on this hose. This hose is kind of turned 180 degrees on its way down there to the bottom, which there's no reason for it. But anyway, the next phase, of course, all we have left to do really is to fill this tank with hydraulic fluid. And then we have to wire this in. It's a 240 volt single phase. And I already have that here. This is a NEMA 50 though. And I noticed this one just has the 2 hots and a ground. So I'm just gonna, this is for my wife's Mach-E, which we only charge at night. And so I've got a plate here that I've actually was meaning to cover up. So I think right there is where I'm gonna tap into it. But I'm not gonna, I've seen some guys and they just put like a cord on it and they plug it in. I don't want to have to duck under that or whatever. Plus, I don't think that's the code. And if I ever sell the house, or if I croak and my wife has to sell it, I don't want it to not be up to code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run conduit straight up this pillar and then over to the wall there and then just come straight down to that box. And I'll probably put it, actually I'm going to do a shut off there. So I can, flip the switch and shut it off and just know this thing's dead, that if anybody comes and pushes that green button, nothing's going to happen. My grandson might come in here and he's older though. He's pretty smart, but just, for safety, I prefer to have it that way. In fact, I bet it has to be that way for code again anyway. So that'll be it. Tomorrow I'll be done. So far I got about 6.5 hours in this thing. I'm looking probably at 8 hours. Kind of embarrassing to say. By the time I get done, I think I could do it in a lot less time if I did another one. But yeah, it's going to 8 hours. It might even be a little bit more than 8, but I'll finish it up tomorrow. We'll do the electrical and then we'll call it good. Well, so I finished up the electrical. That was a pretty simple operation. I just came off of the top of that control box with some flexible conduit, went into a junction box, then I hard piped it from there over to a 30 amp disconnect I mounted on the wall, and then came down into a junction box that also feeds this electric 240 volt electric car charger for my wife's Ford Mach-E. So yeah, pretty simple. They had two fittings that were coming off the side here. I started off, I was going to come off the side, decided not to, just put a blank in there. I didn't want anything to be on either side that would impede, anything that was coming up, something that could catch on it or whatever. So that's why I came out the top. All that's left is to load the tank up with hydraulic fluid and test it. And so I'll probably do that this weekend. I got a couple buddies coming over that want to check it out. So that'll be this weekend's project to finish this thing up. Okay, so mission accomplished. All done. Went very easy. So here's your reservoir tank. So I just wheeled a cart up here and I went and got a 5-gallon bucket. It takes actually AW46 on the weight, on the viscosity, and I was going to use some hydraulic fluid that I normally put in my tractor. It's a Shell Rotella heavy duty, but I looked at the specifications and I don't think it would have been a problem. But just to be on the safe side, I used what they recommended, which was a AW46. I ran down to Tractor Supply and got a 5-gallon bucket. This tank took 10 liters, which I think is pretty standard for most of these. But yeah, so I just, I pushed the button and nothing happened for a little bit while that first bit of hydraulic fluid got pushed through, but then it went right up. I didn't have the vehicle on it, but I will tell you, it definitely made me feel better when I got it up and I realized it wasn't coming down. And it's just the tolerances are so tight on this thing. So it did come down, but it came down really, really slow. But as I've gone up and down with it a couple of times, it seems like it's getting better. It definitely comes down fine with the weight on it. It comes right down. So I did it 2 or 3 times just to get the air bubbles hopefully kind of pushed out and back into the tank. One thing that was kind of a bummer is I expected to see some type of relief valve on the top of this piston, and there isn't anything to release that, to bleed it, so, but I'm sure that the air bubbles, they will eventually work their way back through into the tank. So but my tension was good on my on these cables, which, by the way, let's talk about these cables for a minute just so you all know. The reason that you have these cables are just to equalize the pressure between these two pillars. All the lifting is done by these pistons in this hydraulic. It's basically just a great big floor jack, right? Great big bottle jack. There's one in each one of these. And all the cables do is equalize the pressure, because if you look at it this way, if you took this Jeep and right where the receiver hitch is, you took a laser and you cut this Jeep in half, on left and a right side, they wouldn't weigh the same. They'd be a little different. My guess is the passenger or the driver's side would probably weigh a little bit more, because it's got, the steering wheel and the steering box, and of course you have the battery on the other side. It's probably pretty close, but they're not going to be perfect. Well, if you don't have these cables, on these pillars, the fluid is kind of like electricity. It's going to follow the path of least resistance. So what you would have is one side going up faster than the other. So that's the purpose of the cables. The cables don't do any lifting. They just equalize out the pressure. That's all they do. In fact, I think that's what they're called. I think they're called equalizer cables. But anyway, I don't really have anything remarkable about this. The rest of this, everything was straightforward. I filled the tank, like I said, pushed the button, and it worked. So yeah, in fact, I'm due for an oil change on the Jeep, so I'll do that this afternoon. And I'm restoring an old square body, an 85 Chevy C20. I've been working on it for about a year, so I'm going to get it up here, and I've got some glass pack mufflers I need to put on and whatever. So anyway, so that's it. I hope that helped maybe somebody, because yeah, the instructions, they're not that great, but it works. Seems like it's a pretty good product. So anyway, that's it. Have a good one.